You're listening to Curated Consciously, your all-in-one platform for navigating and nurturing your conscious living journey. Why? Because diving into environmental justice comes with heartache and a lot of damn work. We gotta do it, but as a community, we can make the load a little lighter. Every week, we're bringing you stories, insight, and wisdom from a diverse community of leaders, activists, and influencers, helping you live a more holistic lifestyle that connects your health, wellness, and love for Mama Earth. This podcast is sponsored by Cause Artists, the world's #1 platform for social impact and innovation stories around the world. If you're looking to get inspired, hit us up at causeartist.com. And of course, I'm your host, Jasmine Rain, Curator-in-Chief at Curated Consciously and social entrepreneur. You can connect with me and our community on Instagram at Curated Consciously. Now roll your shoulders back, get comfy, put the coffee on. It is time to deep dive into some thought-evoking conversation, Curated Consciously. Hi, Kelsey.
Hi, Jasmine.
This is our last episode together for the year and the last 2020 episode of Curated Consciously. Thank you for joining me. It feels kind of like a celebratory moment, actually, because, Curated Consciously formed out of a need during the first kind of weeks of lockdown. And I'm so grateful to my personal community, including you and my amazing friends and the people who've supported, and then our incredible community who's been engaging. So whether you've been engaging with us on Instagram or you're part of our Conscious Badasses Facebook group where we dive deeper into some of these heavy topics, thank you. It's been so beautiful and these conversations have been amazing. And a big thank you to you, Kels, because you've just been showing up with me every week, well, almost every week to try and record another episode. And it's been beautiful to not only, have you as a leader and facilitator to kind of, dive deeper into these conversations with our audience, but also as my human to be here and help, we've been just like untangling stuff together, which feels amazing. So yeah, just wanting to give you a little woot woot on the podcast. So thank you for everything.
Well, thank you. Heaven knows we need more reasons to celebrate this year.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I'm so excited about this episode. And I don't want to I feel like this topic is huge because this year has been a fucking nightmare. I'm not going to put it lightly. It's been, overwhelming for everybody. But, as someone who's really a firm believer in astrology and energies, I think this past week has been really special because we've had 2 eclipses in the last 2 weeks. Which is like a huge opening of like new chapters, new beginnings, helping us close and reconcile and reflect on the bullshit that's happened. And we're also seeing a conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn. This is a huge energy shift, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. And I feel like I just want to note that I'm not an astrologer. I like to give my perspectives and my reflections on how I feel and what I've observed of astrology, because I've been kind of loosely studying for the last couple of years. But if anyone's interested in learning more about what's happening with our planet, jump over to our Conscious Badasses Facebook page, our Facebook group, because I'll definitely dive into it a little bit more. So I think right now is a great time for us to talk about how do we now deal with the stress of this year in a way that we're not carrying it into the new year. We're not carrying it into, I hate to think of New Year's as like this new chapter and like, okay, everything's over. Let's like start from fresh, because that's not what it is. And I think this time is just a great time in terms of planetary alignment and going into a new year. And, a lot of resolutions coming in for how we're going to manage COVID moving forward and coming together as global communities and understanding what that looks like. We need to be approaching it with mindfulness. We need to be compassionate. We need to come together as communities. So, Kels, I'd love for you to introduce, kind of this topic today and how we're going to go about it.
Absolutely. So I was feeling the stress just like everybody else. And it was actually making me physically ill in a lot of October. And I was scrolling through my Facebook, and Calgary Pride actually organized this workshop for mindfulness and compassion for stress for social workers and people working within the social sphere. And it was a free workshop, and I just signed up. And we had an amazing facilitator. His name is Deepak Kashyap. He's from the Toronto Mindfulness Center. And I was madly writing notes the entire time, and just felt so grateful to be in this workshop. And I remember messaging you, Jazz, shortly after, being like, I have so much to say about this workshop that I was just in, that was just about mindfulness and stress. And so first and foremost, I'd like to give a lot of credit to, or like the credit to the Toronto Mindfulness Center and Deepak Kashyap for having this workshop. I am so grateful. And for any of you in Toronto, get in touch with them. They're amazing. And this is just kind of a distillation of what my thoughts were. And I am by no means qualified to tell anybody else how to deal with their stress, but hopefully you can take some of these techniques and some of these tips and tricks and implement them into your own life. So, Jazz, if you're ready, I would love to open up this conversation with you and ask you about your stress style. And so we're just going to take a minute and a deep breath to ground ourselves. And I'm going to ask you, what are 3 things that stress you out?
Just 3?
Just 3.
Okay, I would say, okay, I'm very, very ambitious. And I feel like I always want to get things done right away. Like I always want to get things done right away. So I feel my ambition actually ends up stressing me out, wanting to take on so much and knowing I can't. That is a stressor for me. And saying that out loud, I'm like, I have full control over that. But that's a stressor. The second would be, I because I manage quite a few projects, I do find that when I have an overwhelming to-do list, it stresses me out. And like I know, and I'll kind of go over what that looks like in my body, because I know we'll kind of talk about that. And also being able to prioritize, so I think that this all kind of links back to the ambition aspect. But third is definitely approaching difficult conversations.
Yeah. Okay, so we have ambition, we have projects, we have approaching difficult conversations.
Yes.
And then what happens when you are stressed by those things or other things?
Okay, so I actually had a huge work call the other day, and I observed how stressed out and anxious I got after it, and then I immediately started getting acne across my chin. So that like immediately.
Yeah.
I also find that I get highly emotional, and like I can't control my emotions. It's almost it feels almost like I'm going through PMS. Like it's just like these emotions where I'm like, I cannot manage them at all. And I also get stomach issues. Like I get that feeling in my stomach, like that roller coaster and anxious feeling, which ends up relating to like a really poor relationship with food. Like I noticed that when I had that really stressful work call, I needed to work through it. I ate like 8 cookies, which I did not need.
Right. Definitely. And then last question for you for right now. What are your coping mechanisms?
Yeah, I have been a huge stickler to my morning ritual. which is funny because sometimes I find I wake up, and if I like wake up late because I went to bed late or something like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how am I going to find time to do my morning ritual? But I always take a deep breath and do it. And what that looks like is going for a walk with the dog, looking at my favorite spot where I see a beautiful range of Himalayas with lots of snow on them. I actually this is so, I feel like such a nerd saying this out loud, but this is actually my morning ritual. I turn towards each cardinal direction and I bring in the energy from the air, from fire, water, and earth, and I thank them for their gratitude. I just express gratitude and thank them for everything. And then I come back home and I pull a daily tarot card. And that tarot card kind of, I don't really ask a specific question, but I'm just kind of like, okay, what do I need to know today? And then I just kind of take that energy throughout the day so that I am, I mean, you can look at it two different ways. Like it's either a distraction from all the chaos in my head, but also giving me a little bit of direction of like, okay, so if the theme came up as, what was my theme yesterday that came up? It was all about like influential women in my life. And I was like, that made me be like, oh my gosh, like even just thinking about like you or Yvonne or like my mom or something, like I could just think about kind of the people and the women in my life that are just have completely shaped me. And then I feel like, okay, like if they can do it, I can do it. So that's a big coping mechanism for me, but I still struggle with it. And I think just getting outside, breathing, always easier said than done, but taking those conscious breaks, especially when you have a full plate for the day. So.
Absolutely. And Jazz, thank you for doing that little exercise with us today and going through the journey arc of those stressors. And I've lived with you. I know how mindful and intentional person you are. And it's amazing to me, both in myself and then also in examples of people that I admire, such as yourself, that we can be so mindful and intentional and aware and still get so caught by our stresses. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit more and kind of define what stress is. And so stress has kept us alive for eons as humans. Stress has been something that has allowed the human race to continue. It's allowed us to be aware of our surroundings and aware of any of our dangers. Stress is a good thing, and it is inevitable. And there's a difference between that kind of good stress and bad stress. There's a difference between functional stress and dysfunctional stress. And when we get to dysfunctional stress, what we're talking about is burnout. Because while stress might be inevitable, burnout isn't. And so it's just what happens when there's this excessive amount, a lot of the time excessive, and then a lot of the time also prolonged stress, or we haven't been able to catch a break from those feelings. And so what are some of the symptoms that we see coming up when we're starting to experience stress? You mentioned acne as one. I totally relate to that. I am also, sleep is my favorite thing in the whole world, and yet I allow myself to get so stressed out that insomnia really affects me, and I will go a week without sleeping. Other symptoms that we might see in ourselves or just in general is weight shifts up and down, teeth grinding, social isolation. You witnessed me do this multiple times living in our house. Like, I don't want to talk to anybody. And just that immense sense of overwhelm. And our body is fighting for us in these times of stress. We're doing our autonomic response of fight or flight, and our body's supposed to do that. That's a healthy thing for our bodies to do, and we haven't evolved past it yet. And so we know that our immediate response is not to rest and repair. And really what we need to be doing when we're that stressed out and we can't catch a break is we need to be resting and repair, but it goes against our very nature of what our body is telling us to do. Our body is telling us to be alert and active, that there's dangers around. And then when we're in the midst of that, the other thing that happens alongside fight or flight is that we slip into regressive behavior. And so we'll notice an increase of self-centered interactions, and that'll be outside of ourselves with other people. And we'll also, that's especially for me, I spiral so hard internally, and I get very regressive in my own opinion of myself. I get very hard on myself. And those features are in our day-to-day, but they are also activated with social change and economic change, professional change, and psychological change. Does any of that sound familiar to anybody from 2020?
Can I raise my hand? Can everyone see my hand raised?
Is there some resonance there, Jasmine?
Just a little tora.
Absolutely. And so we're in this huge time right now where nothing is certain and everything is shifting. And there's very little space for that rest and repair. And it takes more effort to get to that spot than it typically would at any other time. And it's compounded by the fact that we're also interacting with people who are experiencing those stresses. And so our interactions, while they may be limited, there also may be tensions there that we don't quite fully understand, or that wouldn't be there if there was less shifts going on or less changes going on. And so we're talking about this on the conscious platform, curated consciously. We know that all of our listeners are here because they want to be mindful. You want to be mindful in your daily practice and your daily walk. And so all of this change could also be a chance to pay attention to that anxiety, that depression, that stress, whatever it is, those interactions, those regressive behaviors, that fight or flight response, to pay attention to it in a way that maybe there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to do so in the past. And so we're going to look at this scenario and in a similar way as we look at any kind of physical ailment. And so, Jasmine, I have some more questions for you. You talked a bit about your morning routine, and we all have our routines throughout the day. But we have these personal hygiene routines that we also do. So like what's like a Jasmine self-care personal hygiene thing that you do for your physical body?
As in like a daily practice or just like overall?
Overall is fine.
Well, I do love to shower.
Yeah, great.
It's funny because it's actually, so right now I'm obviously living in a very, very cold ass place. So showers are a little bit harder, which are actually baths because we don't have an actual shower. But I always find, like, for example, the other day when I was really stressed out and just like overwhelmed and basically took off some time to just like reflect and like feel better. What I found is actually just like taking a bath and like washing my hair. I've been recently, I don't know why, I'm just like, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm aging like crazy lately. So I've been taking a lot of intentional time to like take care of like my face and my skin. Like I've always been very mindful of my skin. But I'm doing like facial massages every time I wash my face and like use my oils and stuff, which has been really great. And I mean, other than that, in terms of physical hygiene, I mean, I think it just comes down to the products
You
I
brush your
use.
teeth.
Oh,
You brush your
okay.
teeth.
Yeah, I brush my teeth.
You
Were you looking for just general things? My bad.
just
I was.
general, super general.
Yeah, I shower and
I
I brush
put
my teeth.
fantastic. I put coconut oil in my hair today, and I've
Mm,
been running my fingers through my hair because it feels so good. Yeah,
mm.
absolutely. And so there are things like this personal hygiene thing. I remember when my sister took me to buy my first razor, and like we got deodorant, and it was like a whole going from like child to teenager moment, right? Um, and and so there we that's such a practical thing that we don't even think about it sometimes, right? Like
Yeah,
it,
I'm like diving deeper into it, and I'm like, yeah. If you're just asking personal hygiene, just like daily things that we do every day. Yeah,
yeah.
of course.
And so what about emotional hygiene? Do we ever think
Ah,
about that? like like
ah.
that's the thing. is is do we think about emotional hygiene in the same way? I know I haven't really. I've thought about my mindfulness practice, I've thought about meditation, but I haven't ever really focused on, well, what is that emotional hygiene that just goes alongside brushing my teeth?
Yeah, I guess that kind of brings me back to my daily rituals or my daily routines where I kind of need to do that to feel centered and ready to actually go forth with the day. I mean, can I categorize that as kind of emotional hygiene? Kind of getting my mind and, well, my mind and my body really ready inside and out to move forward.
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. I have one of mine is just like staying in the same place. I'll get which amazingly has been easy to do in 2020, but I'm a very social person. I'm a very extroverted person. And so typically whenever I come back to Canada, I'm driving here and there to visit friends, and like I just need to stay in one place to be grounded, to be present. I've started working my emotional hygiene into my skin routine, right? And so that's the kind of these moments, these little still moments that we can feed into our emotional life daily.
Well, I'm
And
curious, can
then,
I pause you for a
yeah,
second? How,
absolutely.
if you had to give emotional hygiene a definition, how would you like just to kind of simplify it for our audience, how do we break down what does emotional hygiene look like, feel like, how do we define it?
I would say practice and habits. What are those practice and habits that keep you grounded? And it's going to be different for every single person. But it's those things that you need to do when you're not in a crisis. It's things that happen outside of those stressor times. It's those things that happen as your foundation, as your grace base, as your grounding, and they they might fluctuate based on how what's going on in your life, but they're your base level. um, you're not in a crisis, you're just taking care of yourself.
I love this concept of emotional hygiene because then it makes us think like, okay, well, if my personal, physical hygiene is so important, I need to take care of that every day. Of course, that translates to having to take care of your emotional hygiene every day. Like seeing the connection between understanding out like external and internal being just as important and super interconnected. And I think this also plays such a huge role in understanding what conscious living even means, because if we are not connecting these two, and I feel like it's so easy to leave them disconnected, um when we connect them we actually see that, okay, like, yeah, this makes sense, I need to do this every day in order to be my best self, in order to have the energy I need to do to be, to do XYZ, to feel grounded and ready to take on, like 2 hours of, work tasks that you probably don't want to do, kind of thing. So I really love this kind of this framework, of like breaking this down and understanding it. So I appreciate you just kind of just defining that quickly so we can kind of absorb that a little bit deeper as everyone's listening and be like, oh, this actually sounds like a daily thing. Yeah, I should be more mindful of my emotional hygiene.
Absolutely. And And to continue that example a little bit further, I'm going to talk a bit about so that's emotional hygiene is something that happens when we're not in crisis. And so what happens when we are in crisis? And physically, that's when first aid comes in. It's a laceration, it's a break, it's a sprain, it's some trauma that has happened to our physical body. And so likewise, there are things in our mental space that happen as a break or a sprain or a laceration, and that can be motivated and activated and triggered through stressors and all of the different changes and the things in our lives that motivate those stressors. And so when we are in crisis, we have to also look at what is our emotional first aid. What are the things that I'm going to pull out of that first aid kit and wrap around me so that I am safe, I'm not bleeding, emotionally bleeding, and I can heal that part, give that part of me a break, a rest. And so what, like, thinking about it in that same kind of framework, what are the steps taken immediately after an injury, or like what are the steps taken immediately after an emotional stressor and a time of crisis? And instead of bandaging ourselves up, like we know when we see that laceration on our arms, like the first thing that children are taught to do is to go get an adult and ask for a band-aid. Like, we know this physically, but we don't know this mentally or emotionally. And so instead of going and bandaging up that piece, we tend to dig in there deeper straight away and to aggregate that trauma. And we get ourselves so intertwined with that stressor. And so what are the things that we need to do? What are the bandages that we need to wrap around that emotional response? Kind of where I might want to look. And I would say for myself that this isn't something that I'm very good at. It's not something that I have worked very hard on. And this is why this workshop has been incredibly meaningful to me, because I know that I spiral when I am in a time of crisis. When I do that, I dig in deeper, and I get to that point of self-deprecating talk where I believe that I'm the most terrible person on the planet. Of course, obviously, it's so clear to me during those times.
Yes, you're just the worst, Kelsey.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting though is that emotionally, often we're when we are in emotional crisis, when we need emotional first aid, our first kind of, you know, our first kind of reaction to that is usually extreme. You know, it's instinct. It's not, you know, of course we want to be mindful. We want to approach things with patience and calm, and so we can really decide on what the next best action is for protecting ourselves and others, or whatever that situation looks like. But if you think about it, like, it's super connected to what happens when there is like a physical injury, for example. Like, you know, like you slice your finger in the kitchen and you're just staring at it and you're like, ah, you know, like you're like, what do I do? And you're like, okay, run it underwater. You know, it still takes you that pause. You have to take in what's happening. Like, think about like a child. So kind of thinking about your analogy of like, you know, a child, when they're injured, they think, okay, I need to go to a parent and get a Band-Aid. But often, you know, if they are so unsure at the first, like when they're young, when they're really young, they don't know what to do. So they look around to kind of get an understanding of what the reaction should be. So like if you're a parent and the first reaction is, oh no, you know, that is instantly going to trigger that child to burst into tears. And then they're going to kind of turn that into a routine practice of every time they get injured to burst into tears and then have someone, you know, deal with the situation on their own, or for them, sorry. When really we have to think about, okay, how do I approach this as myself? no matter what age you are, I still, when I cut my finger, I'm like, like I don't actually burst into tears, but inside I'm just like, ah. And then I'm like, oh God, what do I do? And just like stand there for a second and just be like, ah. So thinking about, okay, how can I be more mindful in approaching, if you already know that, okay, after I've cut myself, I need to go do this. How can you think about emotionally, instead of having this crazy reaction, how can you just take that pause? And it's a lot harder said than done. There's been so many situations where I look back and I'm like, I could have handled that so much, so much more. What's the word I'm looking? I guess mindfully. Yeah, I could have been so much more intentional about how I was going to, my next step in addressing that emotional need. Um, and I think that's why it's so important that listening to this episode and kind of reflecting, and we're going to have a worksheet that follows this. So we'll link that in the show notes, where basically you can work through the sheet and kind of go through all the questions that Kelsey's been asking me and think about, okay, how do I now start to create a routine around how to approach my emotional stress needs, so that next time it's not an extreme reaction. It's not you going over the top. You're actually setting intentional time, putting it into your mind and kind of conquering that, so that next time when you do move forward, you have a solution that works. But that takes time.
It does take time, especially since all of these different mechanisms of ourselves are interconnected. So our body and our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors, they all interact with each other and through each other and from each other. And just one of those being off will set off the rest. Mm-hmm. And so that interaction between body, thought, feeling, behavior is
it's a balancing act.
It's a balancing act, and it can also become reinforced by each other and through each other. And so we know about neuroplasticity. We know that the patterns that we make in our brain become more and more solidified. Just as in that example that you were sharing of the child going to the adult and the adult reacting poorly, and that becoming that child's automatic reaction. We do that emotionally and mentally all the time. If someone says, like, I'll use an example for my own life. I'm not ashamed. I'm a terrible procrastinator and I'm late all the time. But it used to be something that I really struggled with, and I really thought of as a problem for my self-worth. And so when someone said, oh, Kelsey, you're late, or you're 15 minutes late, that would automatically become, I know I'm late. I can't keep track of time. I am so bad at time management. I am so bad at everything. I'm such a terrible person because I set this person, like, again, I spiral. It's fine. But those patterns became so ingrained in me that as soon as the topic of timing came up, I would break down. And I had to go back and say, me being late is not a reflection of my self-worth. And that's just what it is. Our brains have this power, our body has this power, our feelings have this power, our behaviors have this power, and they all interact. And what we do with those initiations will become our habits and our practices and our patterns. And so there is a chance in there. Like, the great thing about our brains is that we can rewrite those pathways, and our incredible computers inside our minds, like, they fire so quickly and in so many different directions and make so many connections, that this is a hopeful thing then, that we can see that, know it, recognize our stresses, take that minute to understand what has happened to us, how it's happened to us, and decide what we're going to do with it, what it means, how we're going to react, what we're going to say to our partner or our friend or the person that we're living with, how we're going to approach that situation at work. all of these things. And so there are practical things that we can do in those situations and with our stress, and one of them, recognizing that our stress is there to protect us. Thank you for that. Thank you, stress, for being there. And we know about taking deep breaths. We know about counting to 10. Slowly sipping on hot water. This is why tea is such a magical thing. It causes us to take that moment. And so there are a few things in those times to be aware of, things that our brains will automatically do. And we will just, if listeners, I'm just going to read through some of the examples to be aware of, and I'll go through slowly so you can take them in one at a time. But be mindful in your stress about catastrophizing. Be mindful about demanding the shoulds and the musts. Don't be rigid about expectation. Be careful with claiming that you can deal with it and you could deal with it by yourself. Watch your always and your nevers. Don't think that you can tell what the future holds. This is definitely going to happen. This is definitely not going to happen. Strong emotions have an illusion of truth. And in those moments, and away from those moments, and when working with our stresses and being mindful of all of those different elements, are behaviors that we might want to take into account, that are behaviors that will help our physical body, that will help our mental space. Exercise. As much as I hate exercise, it has been proven to work, and just getting to a sweat 3 to 4 times a week for 20 to 30 minutes is doing yourself a favor. Rest up, take short naps. One thing that I miss the most about India is the fact that we can rest in the afternoon. Oh, take breaks and meditate. Eat well. Read uplifting and inspiring stories, and limit your exposure to current events. Repetitive information is not helpful. TED Talks are helpful. Connecting with loved ones. And the act of giving of yourself, giving of your time, giving of your space, giving of physical things. These are all behaviors that will help us in our path to mindfulness and taking care of ourselves. It's doing ourselves a favor in the midst of stressful times. We know that these are stressful times. Any to add to either of those lists, Jasmine?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking in my head, all of this to me sounds like you really need to be kind to yourself. Being kind to yourself is so important. And we often, and because when we get into that spiraling stage, that is so destructive. It is so destructive. And I'm not saying that I am a angel at this or that I'm perfect at this, because it's something I struggle with as well. Especially when you are, if you're like me, you have very high expectations of yourself. Historically, I've tried to work through stress by just continuing to push and push and push. And, if you've done that to yourself before, this is just a reminder that that didn't end well. It didn't end well. Even if you haven't reconciled it, it doesn't end well. And again, this is so much harder to practice than to preach. But you have to be intentional in how you manage your stress, because we cannot accomplish things and be successful and be happy with the results if we are just pushing ourselves through and being hurtful to ourselves, whether that is telling ourselves bad thoughts or making ourselves have to um, you know dismiss the things that we know would make us feel better, and thinking like, well, I'll just get through this and then I'll make myself feel better and then I'll be fine, because that never works. And this is a reminder that that didn't work for you last time and it's not going to work for you again. So Kelsey, I really appreciate you even just, going through that list, because sometimes we're like, oh yeah, that's simple. Like, yeah, rest, eat well, whatever, exercise, I get it. But again, it's easier said than done. We will tell ourselves all the time, like, hey, yeah, when I'm feeling this way, I'm going to do this, this, and this. But really, really checking yourself and making sure that you're actually taking the time to implement these practices is huge. And that's what the worksheet is here for. So I'll be taking everything that Kelsey has covered here and putting it into an accessible, easy to absorb worksheet that helps you just get this all out on paper. Because as soon as you put this stuff out into the world, because sometimes you say it in your head, but often when you say it out loud, whether that's to yourself, whether you put it on a piece of paper, whether you tell a friend and dive into it, you have to put it out there in the universe to acknowledge that it exists, so that you can start to build solutions, things that actually help you move forward, so that you're not constantly looping, you're not constantly in this cycle of basically self-harm. So thank you, Kelsey, for covering all of this.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much more, and there's a wealth of information and resources out there beyond this. I didn't even get through all of my notes here, but one thing that I would like to bring us back to, and link to the beginning of this when talking about stress, is that truly there is a difference between being alert and being anxious. And we get to walk away from the things that make us anxious. We get to make boundaries around the things that make us anxious. And it's important to remember to be grateful for the things that keep us alert as well. So I would just say to our listeners, good luck on the journey. Join me over at the Toronto Mindfulness Center if you want to hear some more resources from them, and then also reach out to your community. There are endless amounts of yoga videos on YouTube, or I know everybody really loves Headspace. I never got into it, but Headspace is a resource as well. And so truly whatever works for you. That's the whole point of this, is whatever works for you, because all of our bodies and all of our chemistries and all of our stressors are different.
Yeah, and I'll link to all those resources in the show notes. And I also encourage you all, if you feel that you are lacking a community that can support you in this journey, or you feel you just, maybe you're not ready to just open up in person with your friends, or, call them up on the phone and fam and all that kind of stuff. That is what our Conscious Badasses Facebook group is for. It is a safe, inclusive space for you to dive deeper into this. Ask questions. We have an incredible growing community now on there of people who give a damn and want to do the work. And nobody thinks it's easy. Trust me, no, it's not easy. And that's why this is why we've created this group, so that you can come in, just rant if you need to, ask questions, ask for support. That's what we are there for. So that's facebook.com/group/conscious badasses. And of course, you can access it directly through facebook.com/curated consciously on our Facebook page.
Jazz, just a little bit of praise for you. I curated consciously. This is something that has been born out of 2020. And it's just been so amazing to watch you compile all of these different voices and these different topics, and to bring people together in such a powerful and meaningful way. And I know that knowing you and knowing the passion that you put into the work that you do, I'm just so excited to see what is next on this platform in the new year.
Yeah, that was like a horrible Mariah thing. My voice cracked while I was doing it. I'm so excited to actually, I'm really planning out some really cool shit for the new year for the Curated Consciously community. So more details on that in Jan. Yeah, I really want to focus in on using my experiences, my expertise, my resources, as well as our incredible community of facilitators and leaders who just have incredible frameworks and tools and resources to share with you. I'm basically bringing everyone together to bring you, I'll just put it out in the universe. I'm bringing you conscious living, intentional conscious living courses and resources to help you dive deeper on your own and still have the personal community, because it's hard. It's a lot of work, and it can't just be covered in a podcast every week or, blog posts. There's a lot to cover. And, this year has really helped me also define what conscious living looks like, because the more I'm building this platform, the more I'm realizing that our community thinks it's, conscious living is connected to like the things that you own, and your external environments, your external spaces, and we really need to look within. So that is Kelsey's alarm telling us that it's been 45 minutes. So more on that in the new year. But Kelsey, thank you so much for
Jasmine,
for holding space for our community, holding space for me, and being here, showing up and supporting everyone moving forward. And I think this is a great episode to end the year on, and gives everyone a lot of perspective, reflection, ways to reconcile with where they're at, so that we can just continue trekking forward to a incredible, I'm not going to say new year, I'm going to say in life, like as cheesy as it sounds, like living your best life, living an intentional conscious life. Again, not
the
fucking
next
easy.
200 years until Jupiter and Saturn align again.
Yes, and I'll cover more of that in the Facebook group. So if you want to learn more about that, just jump over to the Facebook group and we'll dive into it more. Inhale the goodness, exhale the bullshit. Thank you for listening, and thank you for doing the work. Be sure to jump over to curatedconsciously.co for more stories, tips, and inspiration for nurturing your conscious living journey. And be sure to follow along on Instagram at Curated Consciously. Huge shout out to my incredible husband, Profound Sound, for the original dope tracks. Hope you all enjoyed, are feeling a little lighter, and are going into a beautiful and blessed day.